When you have a father who's the long-standing underboss of the Gambino family, the probability of you following in his footsteps are extremely high. So it was only natural that Armond Buddy Dellacroce be inducted into the family in 1978. Buddy Dellacroce grew up in his father's shadow around the Ravenite Social Club in Manhattan, his father's headquarters. In 1980, 2 years after becoming a member of the Gambino family, Buddy Dellacroce was subpoenaed to appear before a federal grand jury regarding conversations overheard outside the Ravenite Social Club, conversations that took place between March 23, 1979 and June 12th of the same year, and conversations that was overheard by a detective in an observation post across the street from the Ravenite. During one conversation, as a guy was entering the club, he was told that a certain person should come up with some bread, $5,000 worth, or he could slip on the ice and break both his fucking legs. Dellacroce was also questioned about the Carmine Galante murder that took place on July 12, 1979. Bonanno members were spotted meeting at the Ravenite 45 minutes after Galante was killed. And Dellacroce was questioned, did you know about the plot to murder Galante before Mr. Galante was murdered? Dellacroce refused to answer. On August 1st, 1980, he pled guilty to criminal contempt and was sentenced to a year. In and around 1984, a young federal prosecutor out of the Eastern District named Diane Giacalone began piecing together a case against members of the Gambino family. The case initially evolved from hijacking cases, all linked to the Gotti crew, and the largest target being Neil Dellacroce, the family's underboss. 3 months prior to the indictment, in the early morning hours of July 10, 1985, Buddy Dellacroce was arrested by federal drug agents outside Hemingway's, a nightclub in Hollywood, Florida. At the time, he'd been leasing an apartment in Florida under the name John Dorm, where $3,000 in cash and 2 handguns were discovered. Records also indicate he spent thousands in the weeks prior on rent, a rental car, and dress shoes. Phone records for the apartment showed that several calls, both outgoing and incoming, involved Neil Dellacroce's house phone in Staten Island, New York. At the time, Neil Dellacroce was diagnosed with lung cancer and was not doing too good. In and around March 1985, Neil Dellacroce, his son Buddy, John and Gene Gotti, John and Charles Caniglia, Lenny DiMaria, Nicky Carrazzo, Willie Boy Johnson, and Anthony Rampino were indicted for racketeering, for crimes ranging from murder to loan sharking. This is the case where Prosecutor Giacalone revealed in open court that Willie Boy Johnson had been secretly supplying the FBI with information for years and was an FBI informant, thus sealing his fate. Initially, Giacalone tried convincing Johnson to become a government witness and testify against his co-defendants. When his handler at the FBI told him this, he responded with, "I'll be killed, my family will be slaughtered." So acting on pure spite, Giacalone exposed him. When William Batista, another FBI informant used to make the case, heard what Giacalone did to Johnson, he took his wife and fled New York and failed to make a court appearance. Neil Dellacroce would never make it to trial and died on December 2nd, 1985, as a result of his cancer. At the time, there was ongoing friction within the Gambino family between boss Paul Castellano, John Gotti, and members of his crew, particularly Angelo Ruggiero. And this all stemmed from Castellano's suspicion that the Gotti crew was dealing narcotics. So following Dellacroce's death, Castellano made some big decisions. First, he refused to attend Dellacroce's wake, which many members of the family viewed as a sign of disrespect. He used the excuse that he was trying to avoid FBI surveillance at the wake. He also made it known that he wanted to close the Ravenite and break up Gotti's crew at the Bergen Hunt Fish Club. 3 days after his father died, on December 6, 1985, Buddy Dellacroce entered a guilty plea in the racketeering case. He was given a $250,000 bail secured by his aunt and uncle, who put up their Manhattan condo. As a bail requirement, he had to report in daily by telephone to the court. The fact that he pled guilty definitely did not sit well with the other defendants, especially John Gotti. 2 weeks later, on December 16, 1985, a meeting was arranged at Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street in Manhattan. Supposedly, Castellano was to meet with Buddy Dellacroce to offer his condolences and explain why he didn't attend his father's wake. Also in attendance would be Castellano's newly appointed underboss, Tommy Bellotti, Captain Frankie DeChico, Captains Jimmy Brown and Danny Marino, both Castellano loyalists, and Tommy Gambino, who would arrive late that day. As we know, Castellano and Bellotti never made it to the meeting and instead were met by an 8-man hit team consisting of 4 shooters and 4 backup shooters who blasted both of them outside Sparks. And just a week later, John Gotti was made the boss of the family and voted in by the captains. On March 28, 1986, Buddy Dellacroce failed to make his mandatory calls into the court, and when jury selection began on April 7, 1986, he was also a no-show, as was Charles Caniglia. Dellacroce was represented by defense lawyer Gerald Chargell, who told the judge that he tried calling his client 2 times the day before, but couldn't reach him, and that he hadn't spoken to him in over a week. According to numerous government witnesses who would testify at Gotti's and the other defendants' bail revocation hearings in May of 1986, prior to Castellano's death, Buddy Dellacroce was overheard telling Gotti, if we get rid of Paul, we can take over the family. On Friday the 13th of March 1987, Gotti and 6 of the remaining co-defendants, including Willie Boy, were all acquitted after 7 days of jury deliberations. When Diane Giacalone was interviewed after the acquittal, reporters asked her if she was disappointed. She responded by saying, "My personal feelings are really far less important than the fact that the case was decided by a jury based on the evidence," which was pure bullshit. She looked defeated, in which she was, although it did come to light that the defense bribed the juror and won the case unfairly. A co-chair on that trial, AUSA John Gleason, would go on to indict Gotti in December of 1990, in which he was subsequently convicted and sentenced to life in 1992. On April 4, 1988, a person called for an ambulance to come to the Snowshoe condominiums on Route 196 in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania. The paramedics found a man who was unresponsive. He was transferred to the Pocono Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. The deceased was under the name Frank Trainer, but it became known he was in fact Buddy Dellacroce, who was 32 years old at the time of his death. An autopsy was performed and stated that the cause of death was cerebral hemorrhage due to alcohol poisoning and that he also had cirrhosis of the liver. Deputies from the Eastern District traveled to Pennsylvania to identify Dellacroce's body, which they confirmed by not only viewing him, but by an eagle tattoo on his right arm, which was known to law enforcement. Please remember to like this video if you haven't already. Also, for anyone who'd like to show their appreciation and help keep this podcast going, you can do so either by the Super Thanks icon down below or the PayPal and Cash App links in the video's description. It was also reported and purposely made public by the government that Dellacroce had allegedly been infected with the AIDS virus. In addition, they stated that at the time of his death, he had gained an extra 50 pounds, which could be another indication that he'd been drinking excessively. I remember years ago, Ernie Grillo's daughters speaking about their cousin, Buddy Dellacroce. At this time, of course, Dellacroce's son was already dead for over 20 years. So he may have had a son that they also called Buddy. For those of you who pay close attention to these stories, you'll realize that they typically all end in tragedy, with very few success stories as outcomes.